And welcome, everybody, to another amazing day right here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Of course, I'm your host for the day, Andrew Cooperrider. I'm always the host of the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Been doing too many other people's shows, filling in for them, I guess. But anyways, I'm joined today by Representative Stephen Doan. He's a House rep here in Kentucky, but more importantly to today's discussion, he was or still is technically, a member of the impeachment committee when the historic actions of impeaching, at least in the House, wasn't followed through on, we'll discuss, of impeaching Judge Julie Goodman occurred. And so we're going to talk about that, everything that went into that, because I know as an outsider, I'm a little confused. But if you're listening on the radio or watching this on TV, we're just going to have a discussion. So you may have some weird breaks in there, but I will make sure to try to keep it all in the episode. But if it goes longer, you can always head over to theandrewshow.com. And if you just don't want the weird interruptions, or if we can't finish out the conversation, well, you can go ahead and check it out there. But without further ado, Representative Doan, thank you for taking the time.
Thank you for having me.
Come down to the studio here.
Always great to be here.
Absolutely. We'll have to grab lunch or something after. But so something pretty historic happened in the legislature this year, and I think some people are lost on it. So let's just walk through this. How do impeachments work in Kentucky? Let's just lay out that before we discuss it.
So, there's a couple different ways that somebody can be impeached. There is a statute that sets forth how a citizen petition can come through. That's kind of one avenue there. And then we as the General Assembly can just bring impeachments ourselves. And so, we have that ability and that authority to do that. And kind of both of those things happened this session. We had a number of impeachments come through, 5 in total. We started with about 3 of them that came through. One was in regards to a jailer out of Western Kentucky. One was in regards to a family court judge out of Western Kentucky. And then the third at that time was related to Supreme Court Justice Pamela Goodwine.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so somebody files these impeachments. What happens? So they come in, they file them. What happens next? So I've filed an impeachment before.
Mm-hmm.
You go to the House clerk, you pretty much just hand them the documents. There's some rules about affidavits and notarized and everything else, and you have to lay out your claims.
Mm-hmm.
It's very much so a legal argument. It's definitely kind of mirrors a legal process, even though impeachment is obviously a political process.
Right.
But it mirrors a legal process. And so if a citizen wants to file impeachment and you can impeach, as the rules have been laid out, anybody in the state of Kentucky that holds public office.
Yep.
Other than a state legislator.
Right. We cannot impeach ourselves.
Yeah. And so you file this with the House clerk. That then goes over to the House, which is where impeachment starts. How does the House respond?
So there's a couple things. We can do nothing at all, or we can impanel an impeachment committee, and then we can have individual, you would call them hearings, or at least start committee meetings on looking at what we want to do with that, or if you want to move it forward or not move it forward. But it can be citizen led. We saw that when the Bashir impeachment, which I think you're talking about, came through. That was citizen led. That was citizen driven. At a point in session, we ended up getting 5 total impeachment petitions.
All citizen driven.
All citizen driven. Well, one of them was not done by citizens. So we had an impeachment. The 2 later that came in were Judge Goodman out of Lexington that you mentioned, and then the chairman of the school board for Fayette County Public Schools. That was actually brought by a member of the General Assembly. Matt Lockett brought that one. And so the impeachment petition relating to the chairman of the Fayette County School Board, that one ended up going nowhere. I think we ended up passing a bill to make it that you couldn't serve. It would have basically taken him out. You couldn't serve as
you couldn't work for.
You can't work for a school district and serve on a school board at the same time.
On the school board at the same
time, regardless of whether or not they're in the same county.
Yeah, that I'm curious. I guess outside the fact that obviously we put a pause there real quick as we talk about that. Outside of the fact that, Fayette County Public Schools is just an absolute tire fire. I mean, the auditor came out last week saying that they had been doctoring the books, and the school district comes out and says, yeah, we've been improper record keeping since 2008. And then, the auditor says, no, they've been doctoring the books. They're having to pull out $100 million loan to make their debts work and try to charge off debts. They've lost 1,000 students, but yet are somehow spending significantly more. They built, 5-6 new schools despite having lost students. And so with all that in mind, there obviously the leadership there needed changed, right? But an argument would be, well, that's up to the voters to decide what is the rationale or the belief standpoint of saying, well, you can't work. I could understand you can't work in the school district where you're, serving at to be a board member, because that's kind of like you're kind of over everybody. It gets real weird. But working in any school district and serving on the school board, was there any rationale beyond we just really don't want Tyler Murphy to continue to hold this?
I think that the rationale was more, school district employees are going to protect themselves, that kind of thing. And so even if you're in a different area or in a different county, you're still going to have that kind of same mindset. And so you're going to do things maybe that are in the best interest of the employers over the individuals.
Well, you're also members of the unions.
Could be.
Yeah.
Could be.
And I think that to me is the biggest knock on Tyler Murphy is he was, or I know at one point he was a few years ago, I think he still is a member of the National NEA board.
Yeah.
And that's who they're dealing with and sitting across the table from when they're talking about teachers' issues and negotiating pay and those other things. That's certainly
well. And there's parallels. You can't. I can't serve on an executive branch board and be a legislator at the same time. There's kind of those separation of powers functions.
Yeah.
Where you are in some sense an executive working for a school district, but then also being a legislator in another district. I saw it as a bit of a separation of powers issue.
Yeah. No, makes sense. But so you get these impeachments. One comes from a legislator, 4 others come from the outside. So you form this impeachment committee to essentially have hearings and discussions on it. Who all was on the committee? Yourself and who else?
Yeah. So Jason Nemes was the chairman. John Blanton was the vice chairman. I was on it. Mike Kleins was on it. Robert Duvall was on it. Kim King was on it. And Jennifer Decker was on it from the Republican side. And then on the Democrat side, you had George Brown. You had Pam Stevenson, Joshua Watkins, and Al Gentry. So
okay. So you had
and then Daniel Elliott was on it. He was ex officio because he's chairman of the judiciary. He didn't have a vote, but he was on there. So
it's somewhat bipartisan. I mean, obviously it's more Republican and Democrat, though at the same time, the House chamber is 80% Republican. So it's, if anything, they're overshowing on the committee compared to their percentage in the House. But so how do these hearings go? Do you guys have your private discussions, your public hearings? So let's take the big historic one was Judge Julie Goodman, right? Obviously we can talk about the others and why to move forward with them, but how does that progress? So it gets filed, committee gets formed. What do you guys do?
Yeah. So the committee gets formed, and then we would go in to just like a normal committee. You have a hearing, you go in, you call it to order. And then what was different about this is that we would go into an executive session. And so then, we would leave the room, we'd all sit down and we'd kind of talk about process and how we would handle each one of these individual impeachment petitions, what kind of evidence we wanted to see, what we needed to go get. And I won't get into any super specifics about anything, but just generally that was the process. And then we would take those things out of the executive committee, go back on the record, and then we would tell the public, here's what we're going to do. And then we would make all those documents public. We made the impeachment petitions public so the public had a chance to see what was actually filed. And then those documents that we would receive from individual agencies, we would make those public as well.
So walk me through, I guess, a public hearing, because you'd make those documents public. And one of the things we'd see a lot would be, the person who's being impeached would have the ability to defend themselves. And then the citizens who filed the impeachment had the ability to, I guess, basically file back. Could they present their own experts? Or
So we tried to mirror it to a bit of a. They had a bunch of lawyers on the committee, so it ends up looking kind of like a legal case, a court case. So the petition we would consider as a complaint that you would have in a civil case or a criminal case, and then we would give. I think we gave about 14 days for each person to respond to that complaint, and they could respond however they wanted. They could include documents. They could attach, expert reports. I think we did end up getting a couple of extra expert reports in some of the petitions. And then from there, we would review all that documentation. We would send out letters on our own. We would say, hey, we want to see, has there ever been a Judicial Conduct Commission complaint against one of these judges or any of these judges? And we wanted to get that kind of information back. And I think we disclosed on the record all of the letters that we would send out. And I believe we disclosed the responses, or at least we told the public what the response was.
So they send it out, they argue back. So through that process of that, you would then, sometimes we'd end up having public hearings with the impeachee.
So after the petitions would come through, we would engage in what I'd call kind of a discovery process. So we would send our letters out. We would say, hey, Judicial Conduct Commission. I think one was fiscal court, and they had alleged that there was an ethics investigation in one of the individuals. We said, hey, send us your ethics investigation. If you've done the work for us, let's see it.
Yeah.
And then that makes it a little bit easier. They ended up never responding, and so we ended up dismissing the one specific to the ethics investigation. But
Which one was that?
That would have been the jailer out of Western Kentucky.
What was alleged there? What was
the allegation was that two individuals had pled guilty or been charged with crimes while in the employ of the jailer. But that's not the jailer. I mean, and so it was, so some people around him were doing bad things. Then it seemed like there was some investigation into his ethics. We never were given a copy of that report, so we had nothing else to move forward on. And so that one just kind of went away. We figured if you're not going to prosecute it on your end, why should we do it for you?
Yeah. So that one goes away, nothing back. But you had the impeachment Supreme Court justice. What ended up happening there?
That one got really contentious, I think, just because of the high nature of it.
Right.
And that one ended
what was
up.
The allegation then?
The allegation in that case was that she was running for an open seat as a Supreme Court justice. There was a pending motion to reconsider that had been filed on a case before them. So the case had been ruled on by the court, and then the vacancy occurred. And then, it's just a normal vacancy, right? An open suit where Justice Van Meter decided he wasn't going to run again. And then an election occurred. All while this motion to reconsider was pending, there was a lot of outside money spent on that election. And the allegation was that Judge Goodman should have recused from the vote on that motion to reconsider because of the outside money spent by a group that had an interest in that lawsuit. And so
essentially the Supreme Court already made a decision on a topic. I believe it's something to do with the schools, if I'm not mistaken. The Supreme Court had already made a decision on a topic. One of the justices declined to run for re-election. And so that opened up a seat. While that seat was open and somebody was running for it, in this case, Judge
Goodman. Goodwine. Sorry.
Goodwine.
Yeah, Goodwine.
Judge Goodwine was the one who ended up winning, but was running for it. While that was going on, somebody filed a motion to reconsider this already decided case. And then one of the parties in that case dumped a lot of money.
I don't know if it was a party, but it was someone that had it was special interest group. They had a vested interest in the outcome of that
the case was about schools, and then the school union dumped a lot of money into Judge Goodwine's election. She was elected, and then that case was reconsidered.
Yep.
And she didn't recuse herself. And if I'm not mistaken, the prior decision was changed.
The prior decision was overturned. Yeah.
Simply, and everybody else ruled the same way. The only difference is when the guys who ruled.
It went from a 5-4 decision to a 5-4 decision the other way.
So it was just that one seat because it switched.
Mhm.
And so what what'd you guys end up landing? I mean, you end up not impeaching her, but
That was a tough one. We only had so much time, and that was a very tough case.
can impeachments not continue past the legislative
They
session?
they can't for the Senate. They can. We would have to make some recommendation out of the House. We would have to impeach. I mean, essentially, we would have to impeach and send it over to the Senate. The Senate can continue on as long as they don't sine die, as long as they don't
Yeah.
close up. They can continue on for the sole purposes of handling impeachments, or doing the trial is probably a more specific term. But we ended up not moving forward on Justice Goodwine's petition just because I think we got caught up in other stuff, and you only have 60 days to try to figure out 5 impeachment petitions. It's a lot of work.
Yeah. Do you think if you had more time, that would have resulted in potentially impeachment, or was it more that we don't like it, but is this a high crime or misdemeanor? What is the standard?
The
for
standard is
impeachment?
misdemeanor in office, and so
Misdemeanor in
that
office.
ultimately is, well, what the heck does that mean? Does it mean you actually committed a misdemeanor? That's that's pretty low. That's a
Yeah.
pretty low bar. Does
Like
it?
you could impeach a person for like speeding.
Sure.
too
Well,
much,
yeah, that's a
you
traffic
know?
ticket, right?
Well, if
Right.
you're speeding enough,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Because it becomes a misdemeanor.
Mhm.
What, at like over 20?
Or
or
I
something?
think a DUI is a misdemeanor, right?
Yeah.
And so you could impeach
Better
somebody
watch
over.
out, Judge Thompson. Anyways, go ahead. I'm sorry.
You could impeach somebody over those kinds of things.
That was an inside joke.
And so it became misdemeanor. Misdemeanor in office. That's a thing that I think 100 members are going to have 100 different opinions of what that looks like.
Mhm.
And so it's maybe a high standard, maybe it's not a high standard, but it certainly is, like you mentioned earlier, a political question. What does the legislature believe is that misdemeanor?
So, did you guys just land on, well, we don't know if that's a misdemeanor or not? We don't, like, I understand you ran into a time issue,
Mhm.
right? Could you hold the impeachment over and consider it again next year, or is it?
I think it ends, and someone would have to bring a new one
Okay.
next session.
And so what you guys kind of looked at that and said, look, there's a lot of questions here. We'd have to have a lot of legal experts weigh in on this, or
No, it was just more. It was more time. I mean, we saw the good men petition as probably more pressing and a cleaner case, and so we just didn't have time to handle all of it.
gotcha. So, so we talked about, I think we've mentioned 4. So you got Tyler Murphy, you have the jailer,
There's a jailer. Mhm.
Goodman and Goodwine. What was the
Mhm.
5th?
It was the 5th was a family court judge out of, I think, McCracken County, and so the allegations there, it seemed like this judge did her job and made the guy pay child support, and he got mad and sued everybody. There were a number of lawsuits in federal court. He'd sued her a couple times, and it kind of seemed retaliatory to some
Yeah.
degree. I'll probably get sued now by the guy because I'm saying this, but it didn't seem to meet any level of misdemeanor in office.
Yeah, I got you. Man, you disagree with the ruling, but it wasn't per se a legal ruling.
No, I think I agreed with the judge's ruling in that
okay.
case. He disagreed with the judge's ruling. I didn't see where the judge made a misstep, and I thought that, and you can almost look at this, and it's a good time to talk about it, because if you look at what the family court judge out of Western Kentucky did, and you look at what Judge Goodman did, who we did ultimately impeach out of the House,
Mhm.
it was starkly different the way they handled themselves. The way that one of them looked like they were just going about their job the right way and got tagged, and the other seemed to be an activist,
Yeah.
and doing whatever they wanted, and so that's why we took that one up.
Okay. So we talked about the other 4. Let's talk about the one, though, that the House ultimately ended up voting to impeach,
Mhm.
which is Judge Julie Goodman out of Lexington,
Yep.
Fayette County Circuit Court Judge. What was fully alleged in that case? So what was fully alleged? And then out of everything that was alleged, what were the issues you guys zeroed in on?
So the allegations, as I recall them, were that she had made a number of rulings from the bench that were kind of egregious and gross misinterpretations of the law. There were about 6 cases that the petitioner brought up to us to take a look at, and they ranged from inappropriate comments on the bench, just making bad rulings, but the whole kind of the theme of the allegations were that she was a law unto herself, that she was making her own decisions.
I know there's some kind of just remembering back to it, some allegations that she researched a case on her own time. For those who aren't familiar with the legal system, why is it a big deal for a judge to go outside the courtroom and seek out evidence?
Yeah, we need to have a record so that we know, so that everybody has an opportunity to know what's going on. It's not an ex parte communication, but it is kind of one of those things where the court's looking outside of what's presented to them and what's within the case. You have to use some common sense on that. If we're arguing over the location of a a stop sign, the judge may just go look at the stop sign and say, well, what is it? That's, or they know that, right? If you say, well, the plaintiff's Walmart, you know who Walmart is, right? So we're going to have some common sense stuff come in there. But that was one of the allegations. That wasn't a very serious allegation or something that I took too terribly. I did a case in front of the Supreme Court recently, and I think one of them mentioned that they looked at it on Google Maps, and that's, we never presented a Google Maps thing, but that's fine.
Yeah, I think I understand the comments. I think she went and found research on something. I think that was it.
The most egregious thing that she did, it was the Botkin case that was before her. Miss Botkin was driving home, I think from work or maybe from just going to the grocery store.
It was early morning.
And it was about, I think it was 2020, 2021 in that area during the COVID stuff. And a driver who was intoxicated, just turned in front of her, cut her car in half and cut her in half.
Yeah, he's going like 75.
Yeah,
45.
it
happened here.
It was pretty egregious. And the prosecution charged the guy with murder, and they end up the judge just ended up dismissing the charges and just saying, I think the prosecutor's racist. We're going to dismiss these charges.
Let's also pause there, because the prosecutor, woman, black woman,
and I don't know if it was the same prosecutor at that time. I think it was, but I don't know. I never, and I saw the allegations and I never cared to look up who the prosecutor was. That never even occurred in my head.
I believe it was a black female prosecutor.
Yeah. Well, she came in and
it was a white judge.
Yeah,
telling her that she's overcharging this black.
And to be fair, Goodman may have just been referencing, oftentimes your Commonwealth attorney isn't doing the day-to-day, especially on DUIs. It's a murder, so she may be in there. But that may have just been a deputy attorney or an assistant attorney. So she may have been directing it to a white person. But so we saw that. I saw that personally as the most egregious. There were a number of other cases where she said,
there was one where, what was it, that she she sentenced a person below what the sentencing laws were or something along those lines, where it was, you're required 5 years, and she sentenced this person lower, and then
there was one where she sentenced somebody to drug court, knowing that she couldn't sentence them to drug court or something.
The sentencing laws said you had.
That was a very confusing one, because she made a legal justification that she was right, and the Court of Appeals kind of said, well, yeah, you knew you couldn't do it at the time, but you kind of you were doing something that you thought you had to do. So that was a very confusing one, and wasn't really, it wasn't as clean as I think the other instances were. There's one where she said from the bench, I think, I understand what the law is, but somebody's going to have to do this the other way, or somebody's going to have to make this decision so that it can get up to the Court of Appeals. And I thought that was a little interesting.
Yeah, wouldn't that typically be? Wouldn't that be like a lawsuit, a constitutional lawsuit, or an argument about the laws? Like a judge, she would have to have the case. Correct me if I'm wrong. somebody would have to have the case before her challenging it. So if the issue is she thinks there's something wrong with the sentencing laws, right?
Mhm.
Wouldn't she have to wait till the defendant sues on that and then get that case to rule on and then send that
Yeah.
case to the appeals? You see
Well,
what I'm
let's
saying?
look at it differently though, because one was criminal, one was civil. Of those
Right.
two cases we just mentioned, in that criminal case where she sentenced him to drug court, I think that kind of everybody was on board, or everybody agreed at the time that they would do this order, which they ultimately couldn't do because it wasn't a legal order. That was Judge Goodman's testimony on it. Again, it wasn't like it was kind of confusing and probably not the best example of her making some missteps. And the other one that I was talking about, where she ruled that, or she made some statements that may have indicated that she wanted to go ahead and tee this up for the Court of Appeals to change the law. That's a little bit like, there's this term stare decisis, where the lower courts just have to follow the law that's there.
Right.
And then you make those arguments at the Court of Appeals and they get the decision, or they get to decide whether they overturn something, but you're always bound by that precedent set by the higher court. So, I didn't think it was too appropriate that you would do that, but again, it wasn't as terrible as the Botkin case.
So you're looking at what's before you, and the committee decides, okay, this is going to move forward where all the Democrats like, no, don't impeach them. Because one of the things that you see online, you see about this all the time is, well, you can't impeach a judge just because you disagree with their ruling.
Sure.
What do you say back to those people?
I don't know. I mean, look, impeachment is pretty broad in terms of what we can and can't do. It's very broad. And, now we're in this constitutional crisis where the Supreme Court's ruled that we can't impeach judges, which despite my reading of the Constitution, I have a bit of a disagreement, with that, that belief. But it's broad. The statute or the constitutional provision just says misdemeanor in office, and then it says it's inviolate. It is our power. It is specific. We have two powers. We have the power of the purse as a legislature, and we have the power of impeachment. And those are ours, that are only ours.
I mean, even in the constitutional sections, not amendments, sections, in the Kentucky State Constitution that sets up, because this is a common claim where they said, look, that's the Judicial Commission's role to deal with this. This isn't the legislature's role. But even where that's set up, it says that this doesn't mean that the legislature still can't impeach judges.
At the end of it, there's like a comma. The legislature's power shall remain inviolate. I think it's inviolate is the word they use. But but basically, we're not undoing that. That still exists.
They made that really clear.
Yeah.
So, you all decide, okay, this goes above and beyond, and you're a lawyer. You've seen a lot of things. What to you made it to where this isn't just bad rulings? This is a judge that is not acting like a judge.
When the Commonwealth attorney came in and she was able to, she was willing to put her career on the line. She was willing to put, her neck out for what she believed to be right. That said a lot to me, that she would come out and be so vehemently opposed to that judge continuing on the bench. I thought that was very important. I've done plenty of cases, and you can get indications from judges as to how they're going to rule and why they're going to rule, and they won't tip their hand, so to speak. That's inappropriate. They have to be open-minded and listen and judge things as they go. Sometimes you go in and you kind of know how the judge is, and not that they pre-rule, but that they've got a way that they take certain things. But they'll always, and sometimes you'll get pleasantly surprised that the judge didn't rule the way you thought they would, and that they actually listened to the evidence and followed the law. And I think that in a couple of these cases, it was just apparent that she didn't listen to the evidence, or didn't bother to give the due process, so to speak, as to what required or what needed to be looked at in that case.
So the committee votes to impeach. Was it party lines?
It was mostly party lines. I think there was one Republican on the House floor that went the other way, that voted.
In the committee, though, was it?
In the committee line, it was. I'm pretty sure it was party lines.
And so then it goes to the House floor, and only one Republican voted not to impeach. Did any
Mhm.
Democrats vote to impeach?
I believe one Democrat did vote to impeach, and
Okay.
that would have been uh, Moore out of Lexington, and he's running against Killian Timoney, who brought the impeachment petition.
Yeah.
So there may have been a little political jockeying there.
Yeah. And so that passes out the House. So what typically happens is then it goes over to the Senate, and it's kind of like a court case. The House Impeachment Committee becomes the prosecutors, and then the person being impeached mounts a defense,
Mhm.
and then the Senate as a body hears it and then votes on whether or not to impeach. Correct?
Yep. Yeah, and the Senate's like the jury.
Okay. That didn't happen and hasn't happened
Correct. And won't happen.
and won't happen. So what happened?
Well, the Supreme Court got in the middle of it. So there was a lawsuit filed, and the lawsuit had been filed before the House voted on impeachment or anything. And it was filed by Judge Goodman's. I'm going to confuse Goodman and Goodwine, so forgive me, guys at home. Judge Goodman's lawyers, essentially alleging that the process was flawed and that we couldn't meet the legal standard of misdemeanor in office. It's basically.
Is there like a preset process that's been set up? I mean, the Constitution just says you have the ability to impeach.
Mhm.
Clearly, we know that it has rules about voting, like how many votes have to be
Yep.
reached, right? But is there anything in the Constitution about what the process has to be?
No, I mean, other than that we have the power of impeachment,
Yeah.
and that the Senate shall do a trial. Shall do a trial.
Not
I think
may.
it says shall. I think it says shall. I mean, like you got, if they send it over, you've got to do something with it.
Yeah.
And that may just be dismissed or whatever. But no, so that's pretty much it. Here's the thing about the General Assembly: we're like the only body in the whole state that gets to decide what the law is.
Yeah.
Like, so if we don't like what a statute is, we're not bound by it. We just change it.
Yeah.
Or we take an action to
I
override
think
it.
that's something people have a hard time, because I'll hear people. It doesn't matter what it is, whether it's, well, this impeachment process is legally flawed, or if it's one I heard was that, oh, well, the legislature had passed a law saying they have to fully fund all school transportation. They didn't do it for this many years, so therefore they're breaking the law. And I have to say, it's time and time again, like, the legislature can't break the law.
Right.
They're bound by the Constitution.
Yep.
But if there's a law that disagrees with what they're doing supersedes that law. They're the law-making body.
Right.
If they pass something or whatever that doesn't follow the law, it doesn't. Guess what? Definitionally, they are following the law because they're making it.
Because we just made the law that.
Yeah.
We just said that is the law.
It's like saying, all right, the head of household, father, mother, parents, whatever, say, all right, your curfew, you guys got to be in bed by 10 o'clock or 9 o'clock. And then there's a night, and you're like, okay, you could stay up till 9:30.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, you're breaking the law. You're breaking the curfew.
You're breaking the home law.
You're breaking the rules about when bedtime is. And it's like, I made the bedtime rules.
Yeah. They're my rules.
Them.
They're my rules. I get to change them.
Yeah. And so, so to you, that argument that, well, it didn't follow this legal process in and of itself is a flawed argument.
Yeah, because there's two routes. There's and I mentioned this on the House floor, and so did Judge Goodman's lawyers mention this during committee. Is okay, so a citizen can bring an impeachment petition, and they have to follow the statutory guidelines set out.
Yeah.
But then the legislature can just do an impeachment. Like, we can just send our own articles in. And so that's what we ended up doing, is we just sent in our own articles on that individual,
right,
on the judge. And so we sidestepped the law, which we're allowed to do, which we are the General Assembly.
So you all didn't actually take, quote unquote, the citizens' impeachment per se.
Right. We didn't vote on it.
You didn't vote on the citizens' impeachment. You all just filed your own articles of impeachment. So the hearings were predicated by the citizens filing, but what was actually passed, the impeachment that is actually passed, did not come from a citizen.
Correct.
So the impeachment did follow the process then.
It did, absolutely. And we mentioned that to their lawyers who were under oath at the time when they testified. And we brought that up and they said, well, yeah, sure, the House can still move forward on that. And so my my statements on the House floor, they waived it. They agreed that we could go ahead and do this.
Right.
And so Supreme Court saw that otherwise. And, the impeachment petition ended up going over to the Senate. And then during the veto, I believe it occurred during the veto period. So we weren't in there to do anything. We just kind of had to wait until we got back to figure out how we were going to deal with all this mess.
And so the Supreme Court steps in to ruling that the judge made that said, well, they're not following the process, even though you are. And the Supreme Court then took that and ran with it, or what exactly did their ruling say?
One of their arguments, which is an argument that, I mean, if I'm looking at it completely neutral and taking my own personal interest out of it, they mentioned that, look, the Judicial Conduct Commission is probably a more appropriate body to deal with conduct of judges, which is like great. Like, it would be nice if the Judicial Conduct Commission would do something. I'd mentioned earlier that we as a body sent out letters. We sent out letters to the Judicial Conduct Commission and the Kentucky Bar Association asking if there were any complaints filed against this judge. And they wrote us back a nice letter that said, no, we're not going to tell you anything. It's confidential. We're not telling you anything. And if you want to look at history on these, we had a judge. It was one of my judges that I practiced before as a young attorney who ended up having an impeachment petition filed against her. And the House held off on that impeachment. It was kind of a clear as day one, because the Judicial Conduct Commission told us, look, we've got a pending complaint. Let us deal with it. And the House said, okay, that makes sense. Well, and so if we had known that, if the Judicial Conduct Commission had been transparent about that there were complaints against the judge, we probably would have taken a different approach on this whole thing.
Yeah, but you were unaware if they were doing anything.
They wouldn't tell us.
And, well, also that, my thing is I look at it in the Supreme Court ruling, it seems completely and utterly, it doesn't make common sense. It seems constitutionally illiterate. It seems ridiculous that the Supreme Court would get to rule on impeachment when you consider the fact that that would set up a precedent that they could rule on their own impeachments.
I don't think they could rule on their own impeachments. I think they'd have to panel a special. They'd have to recuse. They'd have to.
But that one judge would have to recuse, right?
Yeah, but then
with
the others might then as well, because we've kind of gone through the mental gymnastics on this, and I think the way that it would work is that the governor would just appoint a special committee.
Yeah, it just it seems. It just doesn't make common sense to me. Says that the courts wouldn't get to rule on impeachments. It just doesn't seem like it's the proper
and
constitutional function. Whether it's separation of powers, whether it's just like I just laid out, where you'd run into situations now where judges are ruling on their own impeachments potentially, unless they recuse themselves. And what happens if the Supreme Court says no, we're not recusing ourselves?
Right.
And then you file a motion that you do it to recuse yourself. Well, who's that motion end up with?
Right. It truly is a constitutional crisis, not to the level that like all of government's going to break down and we're going to live in anarchy. But it is a curious question. I mean, if you go back to the Federalist Papers and you go back to, Hamilton, I think, said this about our Constitution, the judiciary is the only branch that determines the own limit of their power. We don't get that, in the legislature. We are bound by what the Constitution says. At least, with respect, and I'm talking specifically to the federal, the president is bound by the legislature. They fund him and tell him what he can and can't do. And he's the executive. He has to go do it. But the judicial branch is the one that gets to decide what is constitutional. What are those limits? And so it's always between the branches. I mean, that's always a difficult thing.
The check has always been, though, that if the legislature, which is the people's branch and invested with the most power because of it, because, just factually speaking, there's 138 members of our state legislature. There's 4 or 5 elected executives, 6, I guess we count, lieutenant governor, right? governor, lieutenant governor, EG, and commissioner, secretary of state,
Treasurer, auditor.
7. Okay, 7. Sorry, should know that. But anyway, so there's 7 over an executive, and there's 9, right, on our state Supreme Court, correct? Okay. But meanwhile, you have this other branch headed up by 135 that's been invested with more power, the ability to say defund a branch, or the ability to impeach members of the. I mean, ultimately speaking, the one who can fire you is the one in charge of you.
Yeah.
And so our system, when people sit there and say, well, these are co-equal branches, our system's not set up that way. Our system's actually set up that the legislature is supposed to be the most powerful branch because it has the most amount of power dispersed, has most often elections.
In theory.
Yeah, in theory.
In theory. But in practice, it's not that at all. I mean, the executive is the most powerful because we've given him all those powers and tools. And then, the judiciary is, they get to determine the limits and they get to decide.
But ultimately, it's supposed to be, though, if they decide something that the majority of the people's branch or believe is improper, they can then remove those judges.
Yep. But that's a check. And we do have the power of the purse, which I think is the single most powerful tool.
Sure.
But if used correctly, it's very powerful.
But what happens?
But it's a slow power.
Oh, we don't like these rulings, so we're going to defund the judicial branch. Oh, and then they read into our state constitution something
it says that you have to fund. You have to fund the courts.
This level in order to provide for justice. So you have to fund us.
Like I said, the judiciary gets to determine the limits of their own power, and we don't necessarily get to do that in the legislative branch.
So they come in and they say, well, you didn't follow the process, so you can't impeach it. To which their ruling's just wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, just personally, I don't think it's any business of any of the courts what the legislature does on impeachment. It's just not their role in this whole thing.
I would agree. The Constitution reads that way.
The state constitution makes that pretty clear if you're not an idiot and you read it for like 5 seconds. I love how people will sit there and talk about, oh, no, it's a judicial commission to handle it. And it's like, what does the section of the Constitution that establishes that say? Have you read it?
Especially
actually touches on impeachment.
Especially after that comma,
It's
what's
like,
that?
comma.
What's the end of that sentence?
By the way, they can still impeach y'all. It's really clear. And so this does set up for a constitutional crisis where if the Senate goes forward with the impeachment, what would happen? Right. And I would argue that surely just to throw it back on the courts of saying, look, you don't get to do whatever you want to do. Also, when we pass a law about whether it's sentencing guidelines or something like that, if you have a problem with a law outside of constitutionality, but if you have a problem with a law that's made and it doesn't have any constitutional concerns, you just don't like it as a judge,
right?
You can go become a legislator. Or you can talk to legislators or go through the same process the rest of us do to change a law. You can't legislate from the bench. That's our power.
Right.
And so, I would argue it would have been better for the future of our Commonwealth and everything else if the Senate had picked up the impeachment. And at first, Stivers had signaled publicly he was going to do the impeachment. Is that what you guys were told behind the scenes when this ruling first came out?
I probably can only tell you what I saw publicly, and they kept it all very tight to the chest. So I knew what you knew. There was no secret special knowledge that anybody else had. I think there was, and made publicly available, a scheduling order for the trial, and then the Supreme Court ruling came in, and we put all that on pause to decide over the interim what we were going to do, and then ultimately we decided on censuring. I think we censured.
Not you guys, but
both the Senate and the House censured one of the.
But the Senate decided
justices,
not to hear.
And the Senate decided that they would not move forward with the trial. Correct.
How do you feel about that?
We put a lot of work into it. We stuck our necks out in the House. The Senate does what the Senate does. So I'm not gonna attack them too much over it. It was interesting. in public office, I've had people show up to my house wanting to come inside for whatever that means. I've had people make threats to me personally, to my safety. You people talk nasty to you. All these terrible things happen to you. I was really shocked when I read that Supreme Court opinion, and one of the justices thought I should be disbarred and charged with a felony.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
Yeah,
in a second.
but when I saw that, I kind of thought, okay, I guess the Senate's going to back us now.
Yeah.
There's no doubt that after that kind of allegation is made against your co-branch of the government, that you would step up and help us. And they ended up just not doing anything. They I don't know their reasons.
Was made behind the scenes with the Supreme Court to not force the issue, or the Supreme Court said, "Look, we'll deal with it. We'll get rid of her on our end, but we don't want impeachment."
I don't know anything about a deal. I think that it has to come to a head at some point, because it's just going to linger out there, and the longer it lingers out there, the more that is the precedent that we as a body submit that, okay, they are more powerful than us. They do get to tell us what to do, and I don't think that's the right. I don't think that's right, and so I think something needs to happen with that. Whether that's a statute, I don't know. Whether we come in and update or change those impeachment statutes to put this in there, and then I don't know, let it get through the court system and challenge and all that. But
so you'd mentioned there about it wasn't only Judge Goodman who ended up getting censured. There was another judge that got censured, Supreme Court Justice Kelly Thompson. And he essentially went on a tirade saying, as you mentioned, one would almost call it a drunken tirade. Saying
your words, not mine.
Saying that you all should be disbarred and charged with a felony. What was his reasoning?
Yeah, so the reasoning behind that was that we were intimidating someone in a governmental process. I believe that was the felony. I went and looked at the statute because I kind of thought, what's he getting at here? And legislators are mentioned in it. Like, if you try to influence a legislator's vote, I mean, that's that same felony.
Right.
So, in some degree, it's like, what is that, the pot calling the kettle black here? Like, we're doing our jobs and you're doing your job. And what you're saying we're doing is a felony, and you're going to put us in jail.
So he's
but
saying
how is that not the same when you say it to us?
So he's saying the legislators were somehow unduly influencing a judge's decisions or something?
That we were attempting to influence a judge's decisions, yeah.
Which judge?
It would have been Judge Goodman. I believe that was the accusation.
No, you weren't
by impeaching her.
You were trying to remove her.
But yeah, by impeaching her,
she wouldn't have had any more decisions to make.
but there were pending cases, and maybe that was the argument he was making. There were pending cases before the Supreme Court that she had been involved in.
Yeah, but if you impeached her, she wouldn't be on those cases anymore.
Well, one of the things we brought up in our hearings was that she was too favorable to defendants on suppression hearings. So a suppression hearing is where a defense attorney tries to keep evidence out at trial to suppress the evidence, to say that was wrongfully gotten, and that shouldn't go before a jury to be heard. And so that was one where we said, look, this judge just had an unbelievable rate of ruling for defendants. It was super high. I mean, it was maybe like, it was high. And the others were in like the 10%, 12%. They were very low. I think she was up in like 30, maybe 30%. And so that may have been part of it too, as you're saying, is that he's making an allegation you guys should go and, or you're trying to tell her to put more people behind bars or something like that.
But once again, though, if you go forward with the impeachment,
I think it's a constitutionally protected action.
But also, once again, a judge once impeached doesn't get to make rulings, right?
Well, convicted, but yes.
Once convicted in the Senate, wouldn't get to make rulings, right? So what future decisions would you be influencing of hers by convicting her of impeachment if there's no decisions to be made?
That's a fair question.
I mean, so the Senate has said, okay, we're just dismissing this. So if let's pretend a deal was made that says, okay, well, you guys remove her through your judicial conduct review or whatever, right?
Well, we did find out that there is a Judicial Conduct Commission complaint against her,
Right.
and so everybody felt some security, I think, in that.
So what if they don't remove her before next session? Do you think she gets impeached again?
We may, I don't know. We may bring it back. I don't know. I
Because
know
the
that
Senate isn't sitting on it. It's
Right.
not like a lingering question for them, right?
Right. They're done. They're out. Their sine died. It is over for now.
It's unfortunate. And I just wish whoever that is that runs the Senate would have decided that legislators and their branch is important and isn't subservient to the other branches. I just wish whoever that was
Have lots of wishes.
had a little more, oomph in them. I'm assuming it's a hint. I don't know.
Yeah,
But
but really, I don't know who made that call, who made that decision, whether it came from the body, whether it came from the Senate's impeachment committee. I don't know, and so I don't want to pin somebody with it.
So yeah, that's unfortunate that happened. I guess just real quick, you're running for re-election, right?
I am running for re-election. Yeah.
How's that going?
It's pretty good. The campaign finance reports came out. My opponent raised about $4,000 and had about $198 left in his campaign account with 15 days to go.
That's impressive.
And we had about 10 times the money, so feel pretty good.
Okay. Any outside groups getting involved? Either side?
A lot of outside groups getting involved. This has been a very interesting race.
It's just that way across this. It seems like this year has been the outside group spending year.
A lot of dark money groups that you have no idea who they are or what. And look, some groups aren't even filing the required campaign finance reform or the campaign finance reports, independent expenditure reports. So, I mean, you're not even getting an individual from an out of state entity signing their name to what they're spending. I know there's one right now out of Delaware, one out of Pennsylvania, one out of Virginia.
Do you guys think you'll take a look at those laws, maybe strengthen them a bit, attach a penalty to not filing on time?
Yeah, I don't know what we can do. Well, so the independent expenditure law does not have a time in which you have to report the spending. It just says that once you hit 500, you have to report. It doesn't say when, and so there may be some need to go in there and clean that up. You're probably gonna have some constitutional issues for the First Amendment. If
you're
go
not
in and
trying
do too
to
much.
limit spending.
No,
you're just trying to say, you're saying, look, you already are supposed to file. We're just going to put a time limit on it. Where once you hit $500, you have to file within 3 days or something.
Well, and there's a lot of so Senate Bill 4, which was a law about using AI in elections, and it triggers 45 days out. So there's already been a lawsuit here in the state against an entity that is doing that kind of stuff. And so it's very shady what they're doing. I mean, completely manipulating people's faces, their images, and it violates the law. I know that a judge in Northern Kentucky put a stay on that group. Websites disappeared. I know that discovery is ongoing, and that the rep who they're going after is very interested in finding out who they are.
Yeah, interesting. So you feel pretty good. Any races we should be on the lookout for, at least at the state level? I won't make you go into the federal races.
Yeah, no, I don't. I've been so in my own bubble and looking at those federal races that I have no idea what's going on in anybody else's race. So I won't make any predictions there. But look, I'm 100% behind Thomas Massie in this race, and I'm really hoping that he'll be able to pull this thing out against what seems to be the whole world. Well, what seems to be some billionaires from around the world.
Yeah.
And not necessarily the whole world.
Yeah, it really does. That is just a fascinating race. And I know we talked about beforehand that I honestly think Massie wouldn't stand a chance if the candidate was a little more capable of communicating better. And two, I think the whole not doing debates, not doing forums thing. I mean, I understand from a political standpoint of things, when your entire case is built around, well, you didn't, you won't vote for border wall, or you won't vote for this, attacking Thomas Massie on those things. You voted against this, or voting against paying our troops and things. You make that claim in a debate in a forum right there in front where Massie can talk back.
Yeah.
You end up getting, and I think that's, he's going to get the opportunity to say back, well, this is what was in that bill.
Right.
And so they don't want that.
If you've attended any of the forums, so I mean, this is the way that it's always been, is if you go to any one of those forums where Gallrein has refused to appear, is the moderator does a fair job and asks him why he voted those ways on those things, and he explains it.
Yeah.
And
I mean, I had him on the show, and I mean, I just full on asked him about these votes. This is what you're catching flack for. This is what you're getting attacked for. And he does explain it. You can like his explanation. You can disagree with, his thought process there, but you can't say that it's just clear cut and dry as, well, he voted against this.
Right.
He's saying, look, there's other bad things in it. And if you don't realize the bad things in it, you have to independently as a voter make your weighing. Do I like these bad? Do I like the good more than the bad? And, as a congressman, he looks at it and says the bad outweighs the good in this bill. And I think that's the fair way you have to look at it.
Agreed. And Thomas has tried to do government the right way. He's tried to be transparent. He's tried to represent the interests of the people. He's tried to be consistent. He's tried to follow the Constitution. And for whatever reason, that's being used against him. And that's whereas other people just don't care and they vote against their own interests, their campaign promises, and maintain power and are rewarded for it.
Yeah, it's always been frustrating. And I know you get called this sometimes in legislature, and there's a lot of representatives that I see this happening. And obviously it's happening now with Massie and has happened before, where it's almost a knock on them, where people say, yes, I agree with their principles. I agree with what they believe in. I agree with the points they're bringing up. But if you want to, quote unquote, get things done, you just have to, you got to make deals.
You got to compromise.
But,
right.
And I understand that. And I 100% hear you there. Though I do want to bring up, though, where if you have somebody who is voting the way you wish everybody would vote, why would you go after that person versus going after the people who he has to compromise with? Like, you could say, look, I wish he compromised more. I wish he got more done. And I think that's a reasonable standpoint where you could feel that way. But if you're like, okay, I want our government to be better, wouldn't it be better spent to spend the millions against somebody who is making you have those compromises? You know,
it's because the guys with the millions, the system is working the way they want it.
Yeah, the way they want it.
The way they want it. And so, of course, they're not going to go. And look at Thomas's most recent money bomb. He raised about $1.5 million over the last week from small donors. And I'll go look at it, and it's 25, 10, $100 here. That's the big ones, $100 every once in a while. And it's all over the country. It's all over Kentucky. I mean, I think he's had some like 1,200 voters or people donate to him here within the state, to Gallrein's like 70.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not even close.
Yeah. And it is interesting too. And that's where, once again, you go into this weird thing on social media at times. I brought this up yesterday because, I try to remain as objective as I can. It's really hard to be objective in that race, though, when you have a candidate who you could literally ask anything to, and you have another candidate where you can't even get a comment from most of the time. And people have asked him questions, and he'll say, well, go look at this board, or he'll insist, I already answered this. In this case, a video of Adia Wushner asking him about pro-life issues, and he's, I don't, doing the two-step, like literally refusing to answer the question. And so that makes it difficult already, because it's like, okay, I can't, all I have on Thomas Massie is the attacks have been his voting record. I've had him on the show. I've asked him about it. He's asked about it ad nauseum. He gives an explanation. You can like the explanation or not like it, but he's got the explanation. I've put the explanation out there without any opinion whether I agree with it or not. It is up to you to decide whether you like that or not, right?
Right.
Where you get my opinion at, though, is when I can't get an explanation of anything over here.
Right.
And I get personal frustration. And then on top of that, you have, and people bring up things like, well, what was one I saw the other day? It was Thomas Massie personally has only raised, I think it was like, 150 or 300,000, something like that, out of Kentucky versus 500,000 from California. He cares more about California. Well, then you go look at Gallrein's, and Gallrein's is like 40,000 in Kentucky and like 800,000 out in California. Like everything they hit him on. 79% of his donors donated to Democrats before, and 90% of Gallrein. It's like everything they hit him on outside of the voting record issues. When you go look at it objectively, Gallrein's worse.
Right.
So it's like I can't even report on that without it being a hit on Gallrein. Right. It's like,
well, and we have he is currently the most consequential member of Congress. I mean, if he's getting that much national attention in terms of fundraising, it's because the nation is invested in seeing him be successful. I don't see what's so bad about that. I mean, isn't that what we've always asked for?
Right.
I mean, if you want to say Thomas is ineffective, he seems to be the most important congressman right now.
With how much is being spent.
With how much is being spent, with how much he says something, and it has great influence within the nation. He was able to get the Epstein files released, which took a lot of courage. I'm telling you, a lot of courage. And he also got in the Farm Bill, he got his Prime Act through. So he is making a difference up there. Yeah. He is doing the people's work. I just don't see what's wrong with having a congressman that has national influence. I think you'd want that.
Well, and what is also, I think, I think this is more important about this race, more than anything about this race that really, really frustrates me. And I wrote an op-ed about this months ago. That was published actually up in Northern Kentucky. There,
congratulations.
Well,
you're famous.
Published writer, article writer, big deal, op-ed writer. Where, to me, the bigger problem, maybe individual voters disagree, and that's okay. And maybe there's special interests out there that want to dump millions in. Okay. Trump's involvement in this race, though, to me, seems like a huge political misstep. Not only, one, are you running the risk of losing, and clearly, and just be quite honest,
it would damage the brand.
Well, it's not just you run the risk of losing, and because they just don't understand Kentucky politics. We can return to that point in a second, but also you have this coalition you've built, and you want to win in the midterms. You need to turn out everybody you can. You need to be as motivated as you can to turn out and do things. And when you have such a slim majority, the last thing you want to foment going into the midterms was infighting. You want everybody on the same team.
Yeah.
This would be a better moment to say, you know what? I've had my disagreements. If you want to hold on to the House, if Donald Trump doesn't want to be impeached for the third time, he'd be better off having came out if he wanted to get his agenda done, in my opinion. He'd been better off coming out. You know what? I've had my disagreements with Thomas Massie, but that's okay. We're a big tent party. We have space for everybody. I'm endorsing Thomas Massie for re-election. We as Republicans should all come together and elect even more Republicans in the House so we can get more work done.
Yeah. The $20 or $30 million that will be spent in the 4th Congressional District, which is insane, over like 70,000 voters, maybe. I mean, not like a whole lot. That is $20 to $30 million that could have been spent in a purple district, keeping it red, keeping a member of Congress in. I mean, you're going to go around the country and, do all these redistricting plans. Well, like, let's have a plan to win those races beyond just redistricting it so it's all red.
And also
let's pick up those purple seats.
And as I said, you're a coalition that was grown out of the younger Republicans, especially male voters, that helped Donald Trump win. Maybe he only won because he overperformed in that group. Obviously, they resonate a lot to the Thomas Massies of the world. They resonate a lot to also people like, whether you like him or not, like Tucker Carlson and stuff, and Trump going on a tirade attacking them. It's like, you need us all to come together.
Right.
That's my frustration. It's not even that I like Tucker or even a huge loyalty to Matt or anything like that.
Right.
It's from a sheer Republican standpoint. I want to see Republicans win in the House. I want to see us hold on to power. I want to see the agenda done. Why would you shoot yourself in the foot by yelling at your own base and splitting it up as much as you can? It just doesn't make sense.
He got elected on that coalition, and that coalition could keep him going.
Well, we go all day, but I guess that's what we got time for today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Thank you, Representative Doan, though,
Yes, sir.
for filling us in on impeachment stuff. I appreciate your time.
Yep, anytime.
Absolutely.